thing is really, really fast. Welcome to the Ferrari 488 Pista. Now, I have been dying to get my hands on one of these just to drive and experience what it was all about. I was always a big fan, really, of the way that the 488 GTB drove, but I was never much of a fan of the theatre that it, well, didn't deliver. This, however, this unleashes physics bending performance. It is a wonder. Anyway, we'll talk about that shortly. Let's just run over what this thing is all about. This really is following the now familiar formula that Ferrari applies to its limited edition, and that's not strictly the case actually with the 488 Pista, but we'll get around to that as well in a minute. But they're a smaller production run, lightweight drivers' cars, which is less weight, more power. Music to a petrol head's ears. So the 488 Pista is now developing 710 horsepower. I mean, the figures these days are getting ridiculous, aren't they? But where it gets really interesting is the fact that they've shaved a further 90 kilograms off the 488 GTB, resulting in a weight around about 1,380, I think it's around about 1,385 kilograms actually, which results in a 0 to 60 time of 2.9 seconds. But the figure which really gets me is actually the 0 to 125 mile an hour mark is in the mid 7.5 seconds. Where are we going? I mean, that kind of performance is absolutely absurd for something that wears number plates. Isn't that incredible? 7.5 seconds to 125 miles an hour. Just think about that a minute. Ridiculous. And it feels it as well. It feels every bit of that statistic. So if I drop it down a few more cogs, third gear, 8,000, 8,000, 8,000. And it keeps going. The momentum this thing generates effortlessly. Is it through corners? Well, let's take a look. Oh, the front end is ridiculous. The steering weight. Oh, do you hear that little blip on the downshift? Oh, they've really done the magic on this turbocharged engine. So you'll notice that a minute ago I was making quite the deal of it revving to 8,000, which brings me round to my, I guess, unique point of view when it comes round to this car, because I was a long-time 458 Speciale owner, and I guess I've been approaching this particular car with an element of apprehension, because of course it's lost its naturally aspirated engine, which was the defining feature really of the 458 Speciale. The throttle response and the noise and the relationship between the engine and gearbox as a result of the engine reacting so razor sharp was something to behold. And I was a little bit apprehensive to wonder if they've managed to engineer enough drama and soul into a heavily turbocharged engine with the 488 Pista, because with the 488 it was, I wouldn't go so far as to say sedate, but it didn't rev to 8,000, it revved to a 7.5. But those extra 500 RPM which they've managed to extrapolate out of this engine, and these aggressive shotgun style shifts on the upshifts and downshifts. So Ferrari have engineered a kind of overboost function that when your throttle is depressed over 60%, it sort of delivers the gear shift with a much more aggressive punch, and you really feel that. And it's these elements that really add up to the car having a much greater sense of occasion than it does over the 488 GTB. I mean, listen to these gear shifts and how lightning fast they are. So we're at 6,500 here, and it revs to 8. So watch how fast I have to shift. Relentless thing, relentless. Oh, listen to those downshifts. Have you heard how fast they are? And the upshifts one more time. 8,000. And down. Wow. Honestly, the Speciale did not go down through the gears as impressively as that. That feels truly race car stuff. And that's by no coincidence, because it just so happens that Ferrari literally took the internal components from the 488 challenge car, so a literal race car, and put them into their road car. How convenient, how awesome. The way that Ferrari have improved the brake feel. Now, for me, one of the weakest parts of the 458 Speciale, not that it was weak, it's just that every other component of the car and every experience of interacting with a Speciale was so next level that when you took the car on track, it had so much pace and so much speed and so much capability that after a few very swift laps, you did notice that the brakes fell off just a little bit. Now granted, I am not on track with this car, but I can already tell by the brake feel, the modulation of the brakes, the master cylinder behind my foot. Now the very kind owner of this car that has lent it to me for the day just so happened to have collected the car and taken delivery of it all of 1 week ago and took it from the showroom to Yas Marina Circuit. Tracked it immediately. He too was a long-time owner of a 458 Speciale and has confirmed my belief in the braking system that the car is a complete step change in the experience and performance on track. And the way this thing turns in, the steering weight. Now, Ferraris of the last 10 years, they've always had a slightly, I wouldn't go so far as to say hollow, but it's been a very lightweight, delicate steering feel. This, they seem to have re-engineered in quite a lot of weight, certainly in comparison to their latest cars. And the added tactility of the way that this thing weights up through a corner is beautiful. But where the magic really lies is that you could daily it just like a 488 GTB. And that's where the magic lies, right? It is a real Frankenstein car. On the one hand, look, I can put it into automatic down here and just relax. Bumpy road mode on. I mean, granted, the road surfaces in Dubai are so perfect, you barely need it. But the fact of the matter is, it retains all of the usability of a 488 GTB, but they've turned the wick up by 500 RPM. So it revs to 8,000, which honestly has made all of the difference in the drama department, certainly. And they've gone and done it again. The only thing that's missing for me is the sheer excitement of a naturally aspirated engine. And I don't want to be that guy, because I'm not one to dwell on the past. But I've always felt that Ferrari's biggest problem has been its own car, the 458 Speciale. I believe a Speciale probably wouldn't know where this thing went. In fact, Ferrari themselves will tell you that, because this is 2 seconds a lap faster around Ferrari's own Fiorano racing circuit. 2 seconds a lap. That doesn't sound like much, but over 10 laps you're 20 seconds in front. So it is a massive step change in performance, and yet in usability, dare I say it, it's even better. But the whole package, I'm not sure if it's just because this car is newer, it just feels so tight and so complete. It's a mega feeling. It's something that Ferrari do very, very well, even though this car is in essence a very substantial facelift on the 458 platform, because its chassis is ultimately quite similar to a 458. The way they've improved the composure and the poise of the car is remarkable. So, despite the fact that this car has had quite a substantial increase in power and torque, around about 568, pushing 570 pounds-feet of torque now, the engine fundamentally remains the same in terms of its capacity. It's still the 3.9-litre V8 flat-plane crank that makes Ferrari engines so sonorous, but it's those internal tweaks, changes and component revisions from the challenge car that makes this thing so special. So Ferrari are really upping the game now in terms of the application of their learning from racing that's now filtering down through into their road cars. And that's a very cool thing indeed, because honestly and truly, the throttle response on this car, considering it is a turbo car, if you didn't know, you wouldn't know. The throttle response is laser sharp. It's a fantastic experience, actually, to see just how incredible a turbocharged engine can be made. So back to the beginning of this story, when I said that the car wasn't strictly limited, they haven't put a production number on this car. But with this, I think it's being produced over a time frame. So it's kind of as many as they can make, I think within around about the next 12 months, which still isn't a lot, because Ferrari's total output has always been around about 7,000 cars. So still, it's pretty limited numbers. The performance is just, it's ludicrous. It's absolutely absurd. So let's just run through one more time just how quickly this thing goes through gears, right? So we're in second now. Just listen to this and pay attention. So a massive contribution to that, the fact that it caps out at 8 does create the need to shift sooner, but we now have a lighter weight flywheel, and just the way that the engine is so free revving as a result of those challenge car components, and the sound. Now if you compare this with the 488 GTB, it's almost night and day, because this has the Inconel exhaust, once again directly from the 488 challenge car, and all of these components. It's just drama, drama, drama. It's such a great feeling. It really is special. And what you can't help yourself is playing this gearbox, because it requires you to shift a lot. And as a result, it's very engaging, because you're constantly working the box, even though it has so much torque. Because it revs so fast, you're always up and down it. Yeah, I'm impressed. Dave at Strapstone, I probably should have taken you up on that build slot. The way that Ferrari have managed to maintain grip, even despite the fact that it has such a massive amount of power, is to restrict the amount of torque available all the way through the gears. Now at first this might sound counterproductive, but by not giving you 100% of the torque 100% of the time, it provides optimum traction. And as you work your way up through the rev range, the system delivers you more torque appropriately where it is required, and ultimately where it can deal with it, because there's no point in having all of this power and not being able to put it down on the road. It's a very clever system, and as a result, the acceleration is ridiculous. Now interestingly, despite the fact that the front end on this and the steering weight feels so much more direct and much more weight through the wheel, the steering rack itself is actually unchanged over the 488 GTB. Even the anti-roll bars, totally unchanged. But I am fascinated to discover that the feeling of the car, despite the fact that fundamental components like steering rack and roll bar haven't been changed, it feels so much more direct, and importantly, just heavier through the wheel. The steering weight is absolutely perfect now. They've nailed it. Now I know aesthetics are personal and subjective, but I think the majority of us will agree that the way that this thing looks is particularly awesome. Now that is mostly in part to the dramatic aero change which has taken place on the 488 Pista, namely the S-duct, which is a literal bend that goes across the nose of the car. And if you peer over the top of the bonnet, you can literally see the road passing through the aero. It's a really cool feature, but as a result, the front of this car is heavily sculpted and it just looks spectacular. All of these things added up with so much carbon, interior and exterior. There's carbon everywhere. So as always, I'd love to hear your comments below. This car on the channel has been a long time coming. Literally had to fly out to Dubai in order to drive it, but it's been more than worth it. It's absolutely incredible. What I would love to do is next experience this thing on track, and definitely experience it on a proper mountain pass. The plan was to take this to Jebel Jays, which, if you're familiar with the channel, is one of the greatest driving roads which I've ever had the privilege of driving on, and it's only about 2 hours away from here. However, the locals have told me that there was somewhat of a landslide, and so it was closed, which is a real shame. But surprise twist in the tale, this is actually one of the shareholders of NVN's cars, and we are flying it over to the UK for the summer. And I'm going to have access to it. So no doubt we're going to be taking this to Anglesey, we'll be taking it to Silverstone, so there will be track day videos coming with it soon. But I want to know your thoughts, comments and feedback below. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I shall see you next time.